to be a successful person in business, it's all about your product. Put 100% of your attention in your product and be the very best. For me, it's lawyering. So I wanted to be the very, very best lawyer that I could be. And I didn't even feel like I was a very good lawyer when I started. Like, I was scared about my legal credentials because I'd been with these bad boys who were constantly telling me I wasn't very smart and I wasn't very good and I was a dilettante doctor's wife dabbling at the law, and nobody had been nurturing my legal competence, for lack of a better word. So I had to build that myself. And that took some time because I was entering a field of law I knew nothing about, and I set out to teach myself family law, which is complicated. And I didn't know it at the time. So it's just like, okay, I'll figure this out like everything else.
And welcome back to the Badass Women in Business podcast. We are so honored to have our guest here today, Amanda DuBois. Amanda, thank you so much for being on our podcast with us, and tell our listeners your story.
Oh my goodness. Well, thanks for having me. First of all, this is super fun. We just had a little chat about where we all live, so that was really fun and interesting. And so my story kind of started, I was a nurse in my first career, and then I went to law school and became a lawyer. And then I worked in a law firm with a bunch of middle-aged white guys, for lack of a better word. And then it was time for us to part. And we got into a dispute about they owed me some money. And we went to mediation, which I do all the time as a lawyer anyway. And in their mediation materials, they said about me that I was a dilettante doctor's wife dabbling at the law. And I kind of took that as them throwing down the gauntlet to kind of show, well, let's just see about that. And that was in 1995. And fast forward now, I have one of the longest standing women-owned law firms in Seattle. And the journey of over the past 30 years has been astonishingly exciting and more than I ever could have even imagined. But it really did kind of start with those guys like trying to, like one up me. Like it was so mean. And at the time I was young and like I didn't know anything about business. I was an okay lawyer. I wasn't a great lawyer, but I was ambitious. And I just did the next logical thing. And so from there, I started a law firm. I had been a medical malpractice. I was a nurse, and so then I went to become a lawyer. I figured medical malpractice was the logical thing to do. And it turns out when you're a medical malpractice lawyer, you spend a lot of time dealing with insurance companies, which are probably my least favorite entities and or people ever because they're just so mean. And so I got kind of burned out on that. And then I had this breakup I call them the bad boys. I had a breakup with the bad boys. And then I decided to look into family law because I had a friend who was doing family law and it looked, a little bit more interesting. So what I learned quickly is that in family law, on the other side, it's not an insurance company, it's a person. And so when you're negotiating with two people, you could actually make some progress because somebody has an interest and the other person has an interest. And it's not just you banging your head against this mean insurance adjuster. So I started figuring out how to be a family law lawyer, knew nothing about it. I didn't really have, and I was also being a business owner. And back then there was no women law firm owners, or at least I had girlfriends that had like their own solo practices. So I wouldn't say it wasn't any women that owned a law firm. And at that point I was kind of in a solo practice as well, but we didn't have anybody to look to. There was no guidance. And I was part of this association called the State Trial Lawyers Association, which I don't know if you've heard of the trial lawyers, but they're the people that, represent individuals in civil cases like personal injury lawyers and stuff. And that was also highly male dominated. And if you take sort of all of the sort of stereotypes about the trial lawyers are a little bit true. Like you have to have a really strong sense of yourself and have a strong ego to be a trial lawyer because you're always battling against big companies and insurance companies. So it was me and my girlfriends, like probably 12 of us, and I don't know how many hundreds of male trial lawyers. And so, but we didn't have anybody to go to for guidance. Like I didn't have any, so I really had to just figure it out for myself right from the get-go. And so I kind of read some books and I kind of did things that I thought were the right thing to do. And as I grew, the thing that was different for me was because I came out of a medical, like I came out of I worked at the university hospital where, when you're a doctor, you graduate from law school and then you become a resident and then, the whole story. Well, in law school, they don't do that. You just come out of law school and someone says, okay, now you're a lawyer tomorrow. And I didn't think that was a very good plan. So as I got to be a better lawyer, I realized that when I was hiring new lawyers, I really needed to nurture and mentor them in a different way than most law firms do, because most law firms, it's like, and I'm on these Facebook pages with these women lawyers, I can't remember the name of the Facebook pages, but all these young women they're miserable because you're in these law firms where it's the billable hour and they don't want you to go to your kid's choir concert and you can't go to the pediatrician and you have to work late and where were you last night and why didn't you answer the phone? And it's just so much top-down hierarchy in the law business. And I didn't want to do that. And I thought, well, who cares if somebody takes off in the middle of the day to go to their kids' parent-teacher conference? As long as you get your work done and you're responsible about it, it doesn't really matter. And at the same time, I wanted my firm to have really, really good lawyers in it, and they weren't going to get to be really good lawyers unless somebody taught them how to be good lawyers. And so I sort of started on a different path than I had been trained in, which is, it sounds kind of sappy, but let's love our people that we're working with and encourage them and try to raise up really strong, smart, young women lawyers who are really good at their craft. And if you want to have a baby along the way, we're not going to kick you out and you're going to have to start it. If you want to take off time, then here's where you left and you can go take off time and come back where you left instead of, I don't know how they, fall off the mommy track or whatever. They do that in other businesses and stuff. So anyway, so here we are now. It's still a very small boutique kind of law firm for family law. We've got, I think, maybe 11 or 12 lawyers or something, a total of about 30 people. And it's just perfectly right because it's manageable and everybody knows everybody and everybody's supportive of everybody. So, and then along the way, I started getting involved in some nonprofits and I ended up writing some books and stuff. But that's kind of where I got in the business world.
When you were talking about your experience working in the law, all that could pop in my head is the song Tale as Old as Times, because it seems that women who become lawyers and who work for attorney firms who are male dominated, when it's time for them to plan for their family and wish for that freedom, it always lands or almost always lands into them starting their own firm to get that freedom, because otherwise they're being roadblocked to having a family life to continue their career. But I digress because that was not my question. I just wanted to make a point that it's a story that we've heard over and over again. So I appreciate you sharing it. But nursing and the law are two very different fields and both driven by passion. You don't get into nursing or even medicine because, it just dropped in your lap. You also don't become a lawyer because, it dropped in your lap. So as you were growing up, did you want to be a nurse? Did you want to be a lawyer? Was it always an overachievement plan of yours to be both? I'm really curious about how that thought process happened.
So growing up, I think I always wanted to be in medicine in some way. And I started in nursing. Actually, no, I was going to go to medical school and then I got a boyfriend and then I figured I'd be a nurse. It would be fine. And so then I went to nursing school and I became a labor and delivery nurse, which was super cool. I loved it. It was so cool. So I did labor and delivery for 3 or 4 years before I went to law school. So I wasn't a nurse forever. While I was doing labor and delivery, I met my now husband and we started an alternative birth center, so this was back in the 70s and late 70s, early 80s, I guess. And that was back when they had the labor and delivery rooms and they would actually put your hands in restraints when you had the baby so you didn't touch the baby. And so it wasn't super friendly place to have a baby in a hospital. And so we'd started an out-of-hospital birth center together, which was kind of really crazy. And then shortly thereafter, they started having these labor and delivery rooms like we know now in the hospitals. And so then it wasn't necessary to have the out-of-hospital birth center. But anyway, I was super into the whole childbirth thing. And so it was a really fun, really exciting place to be in the medical world. So yeah, no, I never, ever, I didn't even know a lawyer. A lawyer was never on my radar for any reason at all.
So at which point were you walking? Were you giving birth to a child or helping make that happen? And one day you decided, oh, I kind of want to go to law school now. Like, how did that thought process?
So this is kind of crazy, and it's 100% true. I was a nurse for however long I was in, a couple of years, and I decided I wanted to go do the medical school thing because I felt like I gave up on myself. And so I went back and took all those crazy hard sciences, organic chemistry and physics and microbiology and histology and biochemistry. And then I realized I didn't really love it. And so then I thought, well, now what am I going to do? And I thought, well, maybe I'll be a nurse midwife, which requires you to go to graduate school. And then I also thought, well, maybe I should go to business school, which I know nothing about. And so it was June and it was summer in Seattle. It was starting to be summer. And I went to the university bookstore and to go get the book to study, to get a midwife school, you had to study something called the GRE, which is the graduate school. I can't remember what. And then to go to business school, you had to study the GMAT, which is the business school book. Well, in the bookstore, all those are together. And then the MCAT book was also there, which is the medical school book. But also there was the law school book.
The LSAT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I had never thought about going to law school, but I was at the bookstore and I know I'm ruling out the MCAT, but I'll buy these other 3 books. And so I bought the GMAT, the business school, anyway. So I went home and I started studying the GMAT one, and it was like this lot of math. And I'm like, this is horrible. So I went and got a beer, and I was sitting out on my deck, and I picked up the law school book, and I was like cruising right through it. And I'm like, this is easy. And so my husband comes home. We weren't married yet. And I said, I think I'm going to go to law school. And he goes, well, why would you want to go to law school? And I said, I have no idea, but I'm studying these books and I've got a good aptitude for this one. And I don't want to be a nurse anymore. So this is what I'm going to do. And he's like, okay. And so I applied to law school. Basically, I had zero interest in being a lawyer. I had zero idea what it meant to be a lawyer. I remember my first week or so in law school, I'm like, what in the hell? Like, I didn't know anything. And I'm an older law student at that point of 28. And I'm in there with all these kids who just came out of undergraduate school who all studied poli-sci and history and stuff. And I'd never studied any of those. Now I felt so lost. But I think it made me a better lawyer because I never really had a background in any of that. And so when I got to be a lawyer, I was more questioning, like, why do we do it this way? Or this is stupid. Or, I didn't have I wasn't indoctrinated into the whole system of how the law worked. And so it made me question a lot more.
That's fascinating. What an interesting path to get to where you are today. I love it. And as someone who looked at the business school testing and was like, this is not for me. And then a few years later decided to open up her own firm. Tell me more about why you felt so empowered and driven to open up your own firm versus seeking out another place that maybe just had better alignment with your core values.
Because I'd never even seen any place that was close to aligning with my core values. I mean, this was like 1995 in the law business. This wasn't like there weren't a lot of options. It was all, male-dominated hierarchy, top-down. I didn't want to do that. And so I didn't really feel like it. And I didn't really think it was that big of a deal at the time, honestly. It just seemed like, oh, I'll just open a law firm. And I didn't know what I didn't know. So I wasn't scared. I'm not an overthinker. I'm always the person who's like, let's put on a show. Like, I'm not I didn't think it through at all. So I just, went and rented an office because that seemed like the smart thing to do. And then I figured I should probably get a bookkeeper because I didn't know anything about that. And then the bookkeeper told me, well, here's how you do it. You have to get this billable hours program. And I'm like, okay, well, show me how to work that. And so I got that. And my paralegal came with me. So she at least helped me. But it was really like the blind leading the blind. I had no idea. And I didn't know what I didn't know. Like I said, so I wasn't really even afraid because it just seemed like, okay, you go rent an office and you got some clients. I'm like, where the hell did I think I was going to get these clients? Which that was like a whole thing. So it was just doing the next logical step.
There's some power to the lack of knowledge that we don't have today. Unfortunately, we have too much knowledge at our fingertips. Right. And so I think so many people, like just hearing you speak about that, everyone lives in a space of fear because it's like, if I do that, what will happen? If I don't do it, what will happen? And for you, you're like, what I want isn't out there, so I'm just going to go create it, and no second thoughts about it. And I kind of wish people had that same mindset today.
Well, I gotta say, I'm a little bit woo-woo. Like I've done lots of I don't know if
You're in good company.
I don't know if you guys ever heard of EST, but that was like way back in the 70s, which then became Landmark, which then became something. So I used to do all of those things. And so I had a really strong sense of creating a vision and persisting in the vision and not being willing to consider anything other than, like, I was really focused. Even though I didn't know what I was doing, I was very focused that it was going to work. And so it sounds kind of like it doesn't necessarily make any sense, but it never dawned on me that it wasn't going to work. It was just, I was going to have this vision, and then I would visualize, which I'm a big visualizer. So I'd visualize what it was going to look like to have a successful law firm, and what it was going to look like when I settled this case, and what it was going to look like when I got all these new clients, and what it was going to look like when I made all this money. And I spent a lot of time visualizing, and I knew that I didn't know anything about bookkeeping and that kind of stuff. So I'm not one of those people. And I think a lot of people do this. Like, they think they have to do everything. Like, I got to know how to do books, and I got to know how to do marketing. And I borrowed money. I mean, which I don't know if you're supposed to do that or not, but I got a line of credit, and I thought, I'm not going to learn bookkeeping. I'm going to pay someone, because I'm going to work on being a lawyer, being the very best lawyer that I can be, and kind of a marketer, because you have to go out and find clients. But all the other businessy kind of stuff, I didn't even try to do. I've never done that.
Can you say that louder to all of the people that still believe to this day and feel burned out because they're holding the sales and doing the marketing and doing the books and reviewing financials and also take pride in saying out loud, and I did it without borrowing money. Like, if you want to grow your business and accelerate the growth, yes, borrow money.
Not that much.
Responsibly.
Yeah.
Don't just take without doing somewhat of an analysis, then you'll be able to pay it, and that there is a return on investment with what you're investing into yourself and your business. But yeah.
I didn't even do that much. I just figured I need some money. I need to hire some people that know what they're doing over in this world. Because you're really, to me, to be a successful person in business, it's all about your product.
Mm-hmm.
Put 100% of your attention in your product and be the very best. For me, it's lawyering. So I wanted to be the very, very best lawyer that I could be. And I didn't even feel like I was a very good lawyer when I started. Like, I was scared about my legal credentials, because I'd been with these bad boys who were constantly telling me I wasn't very smart and I wasn't very good, and I was a dilettante doctor's wife dabbling at the law. And, I was almost like, looking back on it, it's almost like, not an abuse victim, but, like, nobody had been nurturing my legal competence, or for lack of a better word. So I had to build that myself. And that took some time, because I was entering a field of law I knew nothing about. And I set out to teach myself family law, which is complicated. And I didn't know it at the time. So it's just like, okay, I'll figure this out like everything else. But then I did my little visioning, and it really worked. And so I'm here to say that you don't have to do everything. And I don't think it's good for you, because if I would have spent all this time trying to learn bookkeeping and not practicing my craft, which is really what my product is. And I think it's true for any business person. Like, whatever you are creating, whether it's lipstick or cars or legal services or whatever it is, you want to be really good at that, because that's how you build your reputation, and it's how you take good care of your clients, and you make sure you're giving them an excellent product. And it doesn't make any sense for me to be then trying to figure out how to do QuickBooks, which I've never done in my life. And I've gone from zero to a pretty successful law firm.
Good for you. So you said earlier that women-founded law firms are rare even today. That usually back then and even today, it's more of solo practitioners. Why do you think progress has been so slow, and what shifts need to happen to encourage more women? And it's not only the law. I think it's in professional services and in creative services that there are a lot of solos, because they're not necessarily taking the chance to build something bigger. So I'm curious to get your thought on that.
Well, I think it kind of starts with self-confidence, because a lot of us believe the story we have in our head about our competence. Not that we're incompetent, but we sometimes make up a story about we're not good enough, or we're not smart enough, or we don't know what we're doing or something. And if you let that overtake your ambition, I could see, and I didn't really have so much of that. I had that about being a lawyer, but I didn't have it about I can't succeed in this. But I think a lot of women, they just they don't have, and they don't necessarily have mentors. And when they get a mentor, there's somebody available to them, they don't always take advantage of it. Like, and we've got this whole hierarchical system that's set up that everybody's kind of bought into. I think they call it internalized sexism or something like that. It's a word where you actually you don't know that you believe it, but somewhere in your subconsciousness you believe that men are more successful, or I don't know what it would be like, they know more about business or something like that. And I read this book, actually. I haven't thought about this in a while, but when I was first starting, I read this book by Deborah Tannen. Have you guys ever heard of her? She's a linguist, and it was called Talking from 9 to 5. And it was back in the long time ago, like in the 90s or something. So it's an old book, but she was talking about how men and women, even in the way that they speak in the workplace, that men are more likely, if they're given a project to do, they're more likely to say, I got this. And a woman is more likely to ask questions about it. And if she's asking questions to a male superior, then the male superior considers all these questions that she's asking to be evidence that she doesn't know what she's doing. And they gave an example in this book, like for medical residents, which kind of rang true to me because I saw it all the time in labor and delivery. But like if some woman had a baby and she had this crazy bad tear, and they have to stitch it up at the end. And if it was a male resident, then you're a nurse and you're like, are you okay? Because it's a resident. And you're like, you okay here? And yeah, I got it. If it was a female resident, it was usually like, can you please call in the attending because I want some help here. And so it's just the different way. And if you're in a male-dominated situation, according to this book, and I think it's kind of true, then if it's a male attending physician and the woman asks for help, then they think of her as being more helpless or not as competent, where the man didn't ask for the question, but the patient got a better result because the woman got the smart person to come in here and help with the stitches. So I think that's sort of a metaphor for how women are perceived in the workforce sometimes. And so I think when you ask questions, and so in my law firm, you ask all the questions, like we're all kind of girlfriends here. And I don't want you going into court not knowing what you're doing. I'm going to be there. I'm going to hold your hand. You're going to sit on my lap. We're going to love you up. You're going to come back from court. We're going to debrief what happened, and we're going to make you a better lawyer for that. But that's not necessarily the way that most places operate.
Well, fresh up the press, because we had a peer send us an article this morning that was titled, Woman-Owned Businesses Seem More Competent. And the sentence under that said, businesses that have a woman-owned label, for example, on Google Maps, are perceived as up to 27% more competent and higher quality.
Wow.
Christy's response was, it's about damn time.
Well, and do you think it also might be because there's more women consumers now? Because there's more women that are in financial position to be consumers of businesses. And so I wonder if that has something to do with it. Like I have a lot of clients, like I'm a divorce lawyer, right? So I represent a lot of women who are business owners and who are successful in their own world, and they're looking for other women service providers or something. So I wonder.
It's true. I mean, we know that women business ownership is on the uptick. It's a matter of a lot of them don't typically make it past certain points that really allow them to continue to move forward and be a viable brand. And it's for the reasons that you experienced back in the 90s today, where there isn't the mentors, there isn't the resources. It's really hard sometimes still today with all of the resources out there to figure out what works best for each individual and what their needs are. I find it fascinating that, I guess the other piece too is, when I was looking for an attorney, I specifically went and looked for women-owned firms because that's what I want to work with. And I think us as women, we have always been pinned against each other in the past. And now we're learning what it is to support one another and how it just lifts up the tide for everybody versus thinking about just yourself. And I think that's where we're really going to start seeing the shifts in women business ownership and supporting one another. That is going to allow us to hopefully excel past the male dominated industry?
Well, I think one of the other problems, I have a girlfriend who studies this a lot, and I'm going to give you her name because she'd be great for your show. But I was talking to her because we're both sort of the same age. And it's like, well, now what do we want to do? Because we've done business and I've got this huge nonprofit that's super successful in books and things like that. It's like, now what's next? And she does a lot of work with women and women business owners. And she says that the big problem that they're having right now is access to cash or to funding, because the women don't get access to the resources that they need. And then with a lot of now with, the federal funding, like there used to be SBA loans. That's all that's being like, I don't know, I get too political, but seems like there's a strong intention to make it more difficult for women to be successful in the business world. And so I think that women that are, super rich women or whoever they are, like, it would be nice if they would, recognize this problem, that there's a ceiling that, like, I don't have that problem because I'm a lawyer and I'm not trying to produce some product that I need funding for. But if you are making, whatever you're making, cars or lipstick or something, and you need investment income, and people don't invest in women-owned businesses the way that it would be nice. So I feel like that feels like it's a big hurdle to what you're talking about, is getting that, going from being a solo or making candles in your basement or something to, having glassy babies or something. I think you've got to find funding, I think.
100%. And I totally agree. I think women supporting women is something that is evolving, but still missing to this day. And I remember reading, I don't remember if it was something that Megyn Kelly wrote or Katie Couric, but one of them talked about, specifically to the media, of whenever a new journalist would come on board and that journalist or reporter was a woman, that there would always be competition because everybody was fighting for that one spot. And so there's this culture in corporate that has prevailed over time, where whenever there is another woman, automatically it's assumed that they're gunning for this other woman's spot. And so instead of helping each other out and lifting each other up, there's always this competition. And this is where Cristy and I knew immediately that we had different values, because we met each other at an advisory firm almost 5 years ago. And we were the only women out west. So the firm was divided into two sections, one in the east, one in the west. We're the only two women out west. And so we would show up at these, company retreats, and it was she and I and a bunch of dudes.
I'm sorry.
And so one would have thought that because we were basically in the same state, competing for the same clients, that we would go like this with one another. And instead we decided, what, power is in the numbers. Let's join forces and let's lift each other up instead of battling each other. And I think that, going back to what you're saying about call to all wealthy women out there to support women in the financial space. And it's not as easy as one may think, because when you have funds and when you're loaning money, and if you're doing it professionally, you have to be registered with the SEC. You have to do a bunch of things and go through a bunch of hoops and loops. But the hard loan, you can still invest in people. You can still invest without asking for equity, because you want to see something happening, and it doesn't have to be millions of dollars. Most people don't need millions of dollars.
Whatever that first hump.
Yes. And one thing that we've noticed is that a lot of women who are not bankable, I'm not supposed to say that. Sorry, Jamie, if you're listening. She's our banking partner, and we're not supposed to say that people are not bankable. People who do not have a relationship with a banker are not educated. And people who are not educated about all the different ways to get funding turn to the easy way, which is often predatory. And so, there are so many ways that you can help people that have gone into bad situations because they didn't have that relationship with a banker. Anyway, I'm getting off my soapbox, but the lesson here is become friends with a banker, or find somebody who believes in you, who can invest in your business.
Absolutely. You said something else that made me think of something about women supporting women. I was just traveling in Europe with my husband, and he's older than I am, and he's quite a bit older. So he's like an old guy. And I noticed that, he is, But I noticed that like when he would go to ask for advice or help, like at an airline, a kiosk or something, the men are really nice to older men. It was really interesting to me because I'd watch these young men and, because like he has hearing aids or something, he can't hear very good. And so who would ask them, like, where's the Starbucks or something? I don't know. And the young men are very, very respectful and very almost loving the way that they talk to older men. And I don't find that young women are that way to other women. And I just was noticing that as we were traveling, like people are so nice to him. And it's always the men that are really nice to him. And it's almost like I'd never noticed it before, but it just struck me that it's almost like there's something in like young men that have this immediate respect for an older man, and they're more accommodating and more kind. And I don't find young women to be that way with older women or with other women. It was just an interesting thing to notice.
It's a very interesting observation. Now I'm going to be on the lookout for that.
It really stuck with me because I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
I'd be, oh God, he's going to go up there. He can't hear very good. And someone's going to get impatient with him. And they never did.
Hey, it's a good shift. Let's keep seeing more of that.
Well, except I don't think that women do that with other women. That's what I was noticing. They're more sizing each other up. I just think we have a long way to go about being more loving.
We do. We absolutely do. Amanda, you mentioned two other things. One, I believe you are a founder of a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
And two, the other piece that's fascinating to me is that you're also a writer and an author. And so tell me, I think, number one, how do you have time to do all the things that you do? And number two, what does having multiple interests or avenues or outlets actually, how does that serve you?
Well, so you get to, for me, I got to a point in my career where I was a pretty good lawyer, I had pretty good income. And then it was like, well, now what am I going to do? And so I ended up writing these little books, and they were to teach people basic legal survival skills, kind of like Law for Dummies. And they were called Civil Survival. And I ended up as like how to be a good employee and what to do if you get in a car accident and how to get a divorce and how to rent an apartment, that kind of stuff. And I ended up it wasn't like I was doing it for money. Well, kind of, I started it as a high school curriculum, and don't even ever try to sell a book into a high school, or it was an online program. Anyway, let me just tell you this. It was an online program. And when I went to market it, nobody had ever heard of an online class. I was going to these like big, I don't know what we call conventions, teacher conventions. And then you have your booth, and there's like 8,000 booths in this horrible convention center. And I was trying to sell this online law program called lawclass.net. And everybody was coming by. It's like, what are you doing? You can't you can't teach on a computer. And I'm like, yes, you can. So, but anyway, I gave up on that because it was too complicated. And so then I turned it into books, the opposite way of most people. And then I was teaching these books to different places, like as a community service. And I ended up teaching these books to a group of people that had recently come out of prison. And just, was sort of not anything intentional. And they were listening and they were taking notes, and they were saying, like how to rent an apartment and what your rights as an employee. And at some point, one of the guys taking notes said, "Thank you so much. This is so helpful." And so one guy raises his hand. He goes, "This is so helpful. And thank you so much, but there's only one problem." And I said, "What's the problem?" And he goes, "We're all felons and we can't get a job and we can't get a place to live." And then they started teaching me. And in that moment, I realized I was kind of overwhelmed with the amount of privilege that I have as sort of a privileged white lady, lawyer, business owner. And I had never been a criminal law. I didn't really know anything about the criminal legal system. I knew nothing. But all of a sudden I had these new friends that were really struggling. And the first thing I thought was, because I'm sort of the can-do person, I'm like, well, God, those are law. Like they're telling me things like, we can't get a place to live because we have to check the box and nobody will rent to us. And we can't get a job because nobody will give us a job because we have to check the box. And I'm like, well, why do you have to check the box? And they're like, it's the law. And I'm like, well, God, I'm a lawyer. And if that's the law, let's figure out how to change the law. So I decided that I was going to put together some kind of program to teach. Then I found out that are you sitting down? There are 100 million people in our country that have a criminal record that impacts their ability to get jobs and housing. Somewhere between 70 million and 100 million. It's insane. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. And most of them can vote. And I'm like, but they don't have lobbyists because they're not Boeing and they're not Microsoft or Starbucks. They're just regular people. And I'd done enough in my first life as a trial lawyer. I'd done a lot of legislative advocacy. So I thought, well, and then these guys would tell me their stories, and I would be always in tears. I'm like, wait a minute, that's just like super sad. And so I thought, if the legislators could hear these stories from these actual people that have come out of prison that are really trying to get their life together, they would change their laws. So I decided to put together a workshop where I was going to teach formerly incarcerated people how to work with legislators. And so I did it under the guise of these civil survival books. And so I called it a civil survival workshop. And so the first workshop was in 2015 or 16, I can't remember. And there was 75 people were there that had been incarcerated. And we learned about, and I was teaching them about how a bill becomes a law and about how organizing works, like women's suffrage and civil rights and marriage equality. And if there's a group of people that all have the same interests and they go down to the legislature and they're voters and they talk to their legislators, the legislators will listen to them because that's their job, is to listen to their constituents. And if they realize there's a lot of them, then they might listen to you. So at the first workshop, so then we started having these workshops, but the way it would go is we'd learn about laws and bills, and then we'd practice telling our story. And then we'd have legislators come in the afternoon, and then my people would practice telling legislators their stories, and the legislators would always cry. And I had no idea. And I'm like, yeah, I hear you, sister. Like, I didn't know this either. And so pretty soon, my little happy band of formerly incarcerated people is down at the legislature, and their little red t-shirts with civil survival on them, lobbying for their interests. And pretty soon they start changing laws. And while that was all going on, the other thing that I realized is that we have a lot of privilege. I'm sure we probably fall in the same category of if we decide we want to volunteer for something, we work that into our calendar and we, volunteer on Tuesday night. Well, this demographic of people, they don't have the bandwidth to volunteer for anything. And so they needed to be paid. They're like, well, we want to go to the legislature, but who's going to buy our lunch? And what are we going to do for gas? And I'm going to take a day off work and I can't afford to take it. So I started paying them. And then we started having more people that were, we were doing more workshops and we were doing more. Anyway, I had a little company that I was just paying all of these formerly incarcerated people to do the work, to change the laws, to make their lives better. And about a couple of years into this, I decided maybe I should be a nonprofit because this is like a really super expensive hobby. I like paying full-time people. So I'm like, this is a really expensive hobby and I need to do something different. So I turned it into a nonprofit. But meantime, they've changed like 25 laws in the state of Washington. And part of what they've done, so then when I became a nonprofit, I'm like, look, if this isn't my jam, like I'm not formally incarcerated and I don't belong leading this organization. So I kind of turned it over to people that had already been in prison and I taught them how to lead an organization. So yeah, fast forward now, it's the biggest criminal legal reform organization in the state of Washington. They've got, their budget is like, I don't know, $2.5 million or something. They get all this state funding. They have, 5 lawyers that work on cases for people with, I don't really know exactly what they do. I'm still on their board, but I'm not an expert but what's super cool is that there used to be this thing, and there still is in a lot of states in Washington, where when you go to prison, the judge has the authority to impose a fine on you, and just because you're a bad person. And so they can give you a fine of $2,000 or $3,000 or $500, but it sits there and accrues interest at 12% while you sit in prison. So like my friend Ardell, he had like a $3,000 fine when he went to prison and he came out 14 years later and that was $20,000. And that's something, and they have to be making payments on those, it's called LFOs, legal financial obligations, which of course none of us people know anything about this, right? It's a whole different world. So you have to be making payments on your LFOs in order to be in compliance with your probation. And so they don't really have any options about not making those payments. So now they're working at Burger King and they're getting money taken out of their Burger King paycheck, garnished, to pay for their LFOs. So long story short, Civil Survival decided that there's a way that you can make a motion to get your LFOs waived, but nobody knows how to do it because we're all former prisoners and we don't know how to work the legal system and we don't have lawyers. So Civil Survival would start having these LFO days, which is so cool. The first one we did, there was 900 people that showed up. And the whole purpose was to get people's LFOs waived. And so they had the prosecutors there ready to do the waivers, and they had the judge all lined up ready to do the waivers. And we waived $7 million worth of LFOs. And as of today, because I just did a presentation about this, Civil Survival has waived $35 million worth of legal fees for people, marginalized people in the state of Washington. So anyway, so this has like become a whole big thing. And then then I started writing books a long time ago, but the book that I just most recently wrote, so I write these legal thrillers and it's a series and it's the same protagonist and she's a lawyer and she's out, saving the world. And the third book that I just wrote that I published just last year was all about women in prison. And so this circles back to what you guys are into. So it turns out that something like 80% of all women in prison are moms. And most of the women, probably that same percentage or more, in prison are victims of some kind of sexual or trauma of some sort. I mean, they've all been raped. And so most women in prison are there mostly because they're trauma survivors. And somewhere along the line, someone gave them drugs or something. The boyfriend said, here, try this meth. And for the first time in their life, they felt safe because they can't afford to go get, what do we call them, SRIs or whatever those, like the pills that we would take if we were stressed out. Because they don't have access to the resources for a therapist or any kind of medication. So they self-medicate with illegal drugs because it's the first time that they feel safe and like they're not, in danger. And so then they end up doing property crimes to support their habit. And then we put them in prison because that's the perfect thing to do to a trauma survivor, is to put them in a cage and take them away from their children. So I have this whole bunch of children out there who have mothers that have been taken away from them. And these children then become at risk they used to call it the school to prison pipeline, but now it's the trauma to prison pipeline. And so there's this whole like culture of us taking mothers away from their children for really no good reason. And then we have this whole group of children who are public safety risk because they've lost their mother to the system. And so once I started, so I have a lot of girlfriends that were moms when they were in prison now because I have so many girlfriends that have been in prison. And I just really wanted to tell their stories because that's one of our biggest risks in our society is women in prison have increased by something like 400% in the past 10 years or something. So we're incarcerating more and more women. And what we're ending up with is all these children who don't have their moms. Anyway, I wanted to put that all. So what I do is when I write these books, there's like a social justice thread in them so that you're reading a book about a lawyer who's trying to find the baby who got kidnapped and going through all the capers of a legal thriller. But at the end of the book, you're like, wow, I didn't really realize that what our society is doing to women. And I feel like those of us who are moms, or even any of us, I think we should, there's a whole situation where we need to start taking care of our sisters who are in prison because they come out and they just want to get back with their kids. And then stupid stuff happens. Like I have one girlfriend and she was in prison and then she comes out and she's trying to be a really good mom. She gets her kids back. But this kid the kid always feels like my mom abandoned me because they don't really understand what happened and why they lost their mom, especially if they're super young. So this little girl thinks her mom left her when she was like 4 and comes back when she's 6. And she feels like her mom abandoned her. And then the school won't let the mom volunteer at the school. So every other mom comes in on everybody else's birthday and you don't bring me cupcakes on my birthday. And how come you don't ever drive on a field trip? And how come you don't help out in the library like all the other moms do? Which then is more damaging to these kids because they get ostracized because their moms are being treated different by the school district. So I could go on and on for hours about this, but that's why I write books. And I give all the proceeds of the books to social justice causes. I'm not getting money for it, which I don't make that much anyway because I'm not super good at marketing because I'm busy. But that's a long answer to your question. Sorry about
hopefully there's so many great things and so many sad things that you've just shared. And I think the lesson in all of this is love your neighbor, no matter where they come from. I remember a few years ago, I was working with a real estate investor who was buying foreclosed properties. And I wasn't aware that when a foreclosed properties went and was sold with an overage, that part of that overage went to, or a surplus fund went to fund the listing agent and the bank. Obviously, the lien holder gets paid first. But if there was an overage and a surplus, that money goes to the original homeowner. And if they don't know that, they never go ask for it. So there are hundreds and thousands of dollars that are just like sitting out there because nobody's claiming them. as the homeowner who is foreclosing on a house, you think that if the bank is listing it for 200,000, right? Even if you owe more than that, the bank is listing it for X, and you sell it for more than that, that more than that goes to you after everybody's been paid. And people are not asking for
it. Where is that money? Is it sit in the state somewhere?
It's in a trust somewhere.
Oh.
Yeah. And so the reason I found out is because she bought a foreclosed property, and she ends up telling that she went and applied for that money to give it back to the original homeowner. And I'm like, you did what? I didn't even know it existed. So it's like when you are working with people who align with values and who care about society as a whole, shout out to Carrie. Hopefully she will listen and know that I'm talking about her. But the difference that she makes in people's lives when she, invests in a property and gives back to that homeowner who has no clue that a big check could be coming their way. And I think in this example, it was, several $10,000s that somebody who's recently become homeless, it changes their life. So, yeah.
Oh my God. Why aren't we hearing about that? Well,
yeah. Well, it's why do we hear about all the things that you just talked about? I think that, geez.
That was a dumb question.
I think that the populations who are most affected by it are also the ones that are the least educated with it. I mean, we're fairly educated and we don't know about it. So people who don't have access to other people who specialize in that, they will never know unless you're going down rabbit holes of research for those gray laws that nobody knows about.
Wow. Yeah. I'm thinking about that. Okay.
Yeah. So hopefully we've educated a bunch of people today.
It's your job. I mean, that's your mission, obviously, is getting this information out. So
yes, exactly.
That's awesome.
Wow. I feel like we could record a whole other episode to continue all of these amazing conversations. But as we're wrapping this up, I just want to first shout you out because you've been best workplaces 2 years in a row in the state of Washington. So always love chatting with badass bosses as well, because it takes, how did you apply to that? Did your team, how did you get to that?
Somebody on our team found it questionnaire. I'm not quite sure, but then they send you questionnaires and have your people fill it out. But somebody on our team thought it was a good idea, and it seems like it was. So
yeah, that's amazing. Congratulations. And just for the benefit of our listeners, as a career changer and multi-faceted talent in writing, social justice, and the law, what are 2 or 3 big lessons that you would like to share with the audience on if they're thinking about, maybe they're in their prime and thinking about changing careers or even jumping in, leaping in and starting a company, and they are not a dilettante doctor's wife? Is that what they call you?
Yeah. Or if they are.
Yeah, or if they are. What would those lessons be?
You have to be brave. I would say, be brave. That's my main lesson. Be brave, and getting a vision of what you want and holding on to that vision, and not being willing to let anybody, don't believe anybody, because there's all this chatter out there, and you've got to keep your vision super clear. So don't share it necessarily with anybody. Be brave, be clear, get a vision, and don't listen to anybody. Believe in yourself. That's what I would say.
Love it.
That's amazing.
All right. Well,
that was a lot.
But it was lovely. I feel like everybody's learned something new today about many things. One day I'll ask you if you passed the LSAT on the first try, but we can't leave it at that for now.
LSAT was easy.
Oh, well, good for you. That's exactly why I didn't go to law school, because I hate multiple choice.
Well, just try the bar exam. That's the one that sucks, especially the Zoom bar exam. Don't even get me started. So,
okay. Enough said. Thank you so much for sharing yourself with us today. And we wish you the best of the best. And we cannot wait to watch what's next for you in Mexico or in Washington State.
Well, thank you guys for doing what you're doing, because women need these stories. I think that feels like it's a almost like a survival thing. If you're a woman starting a business and you're listening to, I'm sure you've got all kinds of really cool women that tell their stories. And that's what I'm saying. Like, be brave, listen to other people's stories of success, and don't believe anything else anybody tells you.
Thank you for that. And on that note, everybody who listens to us, thank you so much for tuning in today. And we will see you next week for another episode of Badass Women in Business. And until then, stay badass. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did recording it. If you like our show, please rate us, drop us a review on your favorite streaming app, and we'll catch you on the next episode. This was the Badass Women in Business podcast by Cristy and Aggie.